In this presentation, we'll talk about analyzing literature. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to understand how literature can be used in life, prepare for reading a work of literature, read a work slowly and carefully, identify and analyze common literary elements, write a response paper, write a literary analysis, and follow the 5 steps of the writing process. So, what exactly is literature? Literature is a broad term for written works from a variety of genres, including fiction, poetry, and drama. Fictional literature can range from novels to short stories and even comic books. Why study literature? Studying literature can benefit you in several courses, such as reading, writing, philosophy, history, sociology, and language courses. You can also use storytelling skills in your everyday life. For example, you may need to explain to a professor why you were late for class by detailing the events that led to your tardiness. Telling stories also contributes to our identities, developing our own characters and purposes in life. Additionally, many people enjoy reading, and studying literature can help you to better understand stories so that you can learn from them and apply their lessons to your life. Discussing and decoding the message of literature with your peers can encourage different interpretations and help you learn to engage more meaningfully with others. Or perhaps you have a passion for music and would like to study the lyrics of your favorite artist. Whatever your purpose, learning to analyze literature can benefit you in many ways. To get started, we'll talk a little bit about analyzing literature. When analyzing literature, you'll want to start by reading the work. Before you sit down to read, however, you should establish a routine to help you prepare for reading. Find a comfortable place that will allow you to focus on what you're reading. You might prefer a cozy reading nook, a desk, a library, or a nice spot outside. Go with whatever works for you. You should also set yourself up for success by avoiding distractions. For example, turn off your phone, ask your roommates or family members for some quiet time, have a snack or drink ready, or if you're reading from a screen, such as a tablet or computer, turn off any notifications that might pop up while you read. Before you begin reading, preview the text. Take a look at the title, look up the author, and find the publishing date. Then, think about your initial expectations of the work based on these elements. As you read, consider whether your expectations hold true by the end or change in some way. If the work is relatively short, such as a short story or poem, read it once in its entirety to get a feel for its main ideas and develop an initial response to the text. Then go back and read it again carefully and slowly, making notes of various literary elements that you may come across. We'll go over some of these elements in this presentation, but you should be sure to read about them in more depth in your textbook if you're taking a literature course. If you're reading a much longer work, such as a novel or long play, it may be better to take notes and analyze the text while you read it the first time through, especially if you're pressed for time. The overall purpose for analyzing literature is to help you better understand the meaning of the work that you're reading by pulling it apart and taking a closer look at its individual elements. You should also annotate the work as you read. Circle and define any words that you don't know, and look up allusions that you're unfamiliar with. We'll talk more about allusions later in this presentation. Highlight or underline passages that you think are important to the text's overall meaning, or write short summaries of each paragraph or section in the margins. If you have questions about the text as you go, write them in the margins as well and see if you can answer them later. In addition to annotating the text, You should also take notes on the various literary elements that you find, which may vary depending on the work and genre of literature that you're reading. The primary goal of an analysis should be to develop an interpretation of the work that focuses on what the text means, what purpose it serves, or what message the writer is trying to get across to the reader, while the secondary goal should be to determine how the text uses literary elements to accomplish its purpose or get its message across. Keep in mind that there may be several possible interpretations of the text. Watch for details that stand out to you personally. In this presentation, we'll talk about a few of the most common literary elements. As you read, try to identify these elements and answer these questions about them in your reading notes. Plot. What happens in the text? What are your initial expectations at the beginning? Are there distinguishable events or sections? Where do changes occur? Characters. Does the text include characters? If so, who are they and what roles do they play? Point of view. Is the text narrated or is there a clear speaker? If so, what point of view is used? Does the narrator or speaker use a particular tone? Setting. When and where does the text take place? Context. How do the text's historical, cultural, or biographical details affect your interpretation of it? Figurative language. Does the text use any figures of speech? If so, what effect do they have on your understanding of it? And theme. What does the text mean? Do any particular elements stand out? Now we'll go over these elements in a little more detail. First, plot is most often used in fiction and drama, though it can also be used in poetry. The plot is a story's sequence of events and focuses on describing what happens in the story. The plot of a story can be broken up into 3 parts: the beginning, the middle, and the end. The beginning of a story, also known as the exposition, usually introduces the setting of the story by describing where and when it takes place, introduces the characters of the story, sets the tone of the story, and introduces the conflict of the story, which is generally a problem that the main character needs to solve. The middle of the story consists of rising action, or events that are generated by the conflict. Typically, characters will act either alone or with or against other characters in order to solve a problem or reach a goal. The middle of the story ends with the climax, or the point of greatest intensity. This is where the main character reaches his or her turning point. Finally, the end of the story contains the resolution. This is where the conflict of the story is resolved, for better or worse. Usually, the end is the shortest part of the story. Most stories are linear, meaning that they start at the beginning and move linearly through time until they reach the end. However, some stories begin in medias res, meaning in the middle of things, or use flashbacks or flash forwards to tell the story non-linearly. Another element of literature is characters, which are most often used in fiction and drama. As mentioned before, characters are often introduced at the beginning. The writer will often reveal characters a few details at a time. The writer may choose a few key descriptive details to show you what the characters look like and/or reveal their personalities through the use of dialogue, action in the story, and the way they interact with other characters. Some characters are central to a story, while others may be less important. If one character seems to be the good guy in the story, we call that character the protagonist. Similarly, we call the bad guy, or the character the protagonist has to work against, the antagonist. You can also categorize characters by type. Characters can either be round or flat and dynamic or static. Round characters are generally described in detail by the writer. We get to know them both inside and outside. That is, we learn what they look like physically, but the writer also gives us an idea as to what they are thinking and feeling throughout the story. A flat character, on the other hand, is usually only described from the outside. They may only exist to play a particular role in the story, like a doctor or mail carrier. Flat characters can be described as two-dimensional when compared to round characters, who are typically more three-dimensional. Dynamic characters tend to undergo a change throughout the course of the story, often due to something that happens in the climax. Generally, this change happens to the main character and is an effect of that character's actions, choices, or decisions. In contrast, static characters do not seem to learn, change, or grow throughout the story. Next, we'll talk a little bit about point of view and tone. Stories and poems can be told from first, second, or third-person point of view. Writers often create a persona and use a particular tone to develop the narrator of a story or speaker of a poem. These traits are generally revealed at the beginning and can be found in the narrator or speaker's attitude toward the characters or situation and through the choice of words they use to develop their voice. Keep in mind that the narrator or speaker may not be the actual author or poet. For example, Mark Twain wrote the book Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but the narrator, the one who tells the story, is a fictional young boy, Huck Finn. A first-person narrator tells the story as a participant in the action, using pronouns like I, me, my, and us. A reliable first-person narrator tells the story as it really is, while an unreliable narrator may bend the truth. For example, sometimes we change small details in our story in a way that makes us look better in some way. Or you may read a story and find out at the end that the narrator is insane, so it's difficult for us as readers to believe every word he or she says. A story may also use the second-person point of view, which often addresses the reader from time to time using pronouns like you or your. For example, in the 19th century, it was popular for narrators to ask the readers questions and refer to them as "Dear Reader." Another example can be found in the first line of Moby Dick. Call Me Ishmael asks the reader to refer to the narrator in a particular way. Second-person point of view is usually used alongside first person. Finally, a third-person narrator tells the story as a non-participant, using pronouns like he, she, it, and they to refer to the characters and tell what happens in the story. An omniscient or all-knowing third-person narrator not only tells what happens in the story, but they can also see inside all of the characters' minds and relate what they're thinking and feeling. A selective omniscient narrator can only see inside the mind of one character, generally the main character or protagonist, but not all characters. Lastly, an objective narrator cannot see into any character's mind and simply tells the story through action and dialogue alone. Next, setting refers to the time and place in which a work of literature takes place. Time can be determined by one of two ways. Sometimes the narrator or speaker tells you directly when the story takes place. Other times, you may have to use context from the story to figure out when it occurs. For example, how do the characters dress, speak, and behave? Remember that just because a work was published on a certain date doesn't necessarily mean that it takes place during that time. Works can be written about the past, the present, or the future. Also think about how much time passes. A novel may take place over several years, while a short story, poem, or play may focus on only a few hours of the character's time. The setting also includes where a work of literature takes place. As readers, we have different expectations of a story that occurs in the Wild West, New York City, or the frozen tundra of Russia. The setting doesn't have to be a real place. It can also be fictional, such as a made-up town or a distant planet. A work may also use a particular locale, such as a saloon in an Old West town. Here you expect characters to look a certain way. They may be wearing cowboy boots, spurs, and hats. Act a certain way. They may be uncivilized, drinking, and playing cards. And talk a certain way. They may use Southern dialects, accents, and slang. Finally, the time of year and weather may contribute to the setting and the overall mood and tone of the story, or it may become a character in itself. For example, in Jack London's To Build a Fire, the freezing Yukon acts as the antagonist of the story. Similarly, you can analyze the historical, cultural, and biographical context of a work of literature by doing a bit of research. Contextual details about the time and place in which a work is written can affect our overall understanding of it or reaction to it. Sometimes, writers use particular historical or cultural settings intentionally in order to comment on what was happening then or even now. A work might be written during or about a particular place and time in history, such as Germany during World War II. Focus on specific social or cultural movements, such as the American Civil Rights Movement or the French Revolution. Belong to a particular literary movement, such as English Romanticism or American Naturalism, or be influenced by biographical details from the writer's life, such as when and where they lived, their experiences, worldviews, or intentions for writing. Contextual sources may include studies, books, articles, or government documents about the time, place, or movement, biographies about or interviews of the writer, or autobiographies, letters, diaries, or other works by the same writer. Works of literature also use figurative language, or language that's intended to create an image, association, or other effect in the mind of the listener or reader that goes beyond the literal meaning or expected use of the words involved. Specific techniques of figurative language are known as figures of speech. Though there are many more, we'll focus on the most common figures of speech used in literature in this presentation: symbolism, imagery, irony, simile, metaphor, personification, allusion, and satire. Symbols are things such as objects, sounds, colors, or words that invoke emotional, religious, or other intellectual associations beyond their literal meaning. For example, the color black may represent death, evil, or darkness, whereas the color green may represent new life, fertility, and hope. An eagle may represent freedom, and a dove may symbolize peace. A wedding ring may be used to represent unity and endurance because it's in the shape of a circle and made of gold. Even weather can serve as a symbol. For example, fog might symbolize confusion or obscurity, and lightning might represent power and strength. Symbols can be found in the connotation of characters' names, too. For example, the name Daisy may symbolize a character who is feminine, gentle, and pretty, while harsh-sounding names like Voldemort may invoke feelings of evil or darkness. Most of the time, the writer will give you hints as to what serves as symbolism, but other times they require you to think outside the box to make connections. An allegory is a work that is entirely permeated by symbolism through details such as character, plot, and setting in order to teach the reader a moral or lesson. For example, The Tortoise and the Hare is a story that teaches the idea that slow and steady wins the race. Imagery is how a writer uses words to paint a picture of what's happening in the story or poem by appealing to a reader's sense of touch, taste, sound, smell, and sight. Including these details enhances the writing and makes it more vivid. Let's take a look at a few lines from a poem by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Here, Wordsworth uses details that help the reader see and feel a picturesque scene in nature. A writer may also use imagery to create symbolic associations. For example, describing a beautiful sunny morning might symbolize a fresh start and hope, or it might set a happy and bright tone for the story. Next, irony is a literary device that uses contradictory statements or situations to reveal a reality that is different from what appears to be true. In other words, irony occurs when something happens that is strange or funny because it's the opposite of what you would expect to happen. There are three types of irony: verbal irony, situational irony, and dramatic irony. Verbal irony uses words to express something other than or opposite to the truth. For example, you might look out the window at a thunderstorm and say, "Nice weather we're having." In this example, you're using irony to suggest that the weather is in fact not nice at all. Situational irony occurs when the result of events are unusual or unexpected. An example of situational irony might be a fire station burning down, an unexpected and surprising event considering the whole purpose of a fire station is to put out fires. Situational irony can also occur in the setting of a story. An example might be someone dying on a bright, sunny day, or finding out great news on a dark, stormy night. These examples are ironic because you expect happy things to happen during nice weather and bad things to happen during bad weather. Finally, dramatic irony occurs when the reader or audience is aware of information that other characters in the story may not be aware of. For example, in Romeo and Juliet, the audience is aware that Juliet takes drugs to induce sleep, but Romeo believes she is dead and kills himself, which increases the audience's shock and makes the tragedy of the lover's death more powerful. When analyzing a story, keep an eye out for examples of irony that may contribute to the story's overall effect on the reader. Similes and metaphors are figures of speech that are used to compare two unlike things in order to ascribe particular qualities to the first. A simile uses the word like or as to make a direct, explicit comparison. For example, in his poem, Robert Burns states, "Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June." Here, Burns expresses the idea that his love is beautiful and fresh by comparing it to a rose that has just bloomed. A metaphor, on the other hand, makes a comparison by describing one thing as if it were another without using like or as. For example, in her song, Pat Benatar declares that love is a battlefield. In this comparison, the singer suggests that love involves struggle and pain, which gives the reader a new, more vivid way of seeing love, especially since love is more often compared to things that are beautiful, as shown in the first example. An extended metaphor is one that stretches out across a long section of a work, and if the metaphor dominates an entire work, it's known as a controlling metaphor. Personification is a figure of speech that gives human attributes to something non-human. Let's look at a few lines from the poet Emily Dickinson. "Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality." Here, death is given human qualities. It can drive a carriage, it can make the conscious decision to stop the carriage for the speaker, and it's given the pronoun he. An allusion is an indirect reference to something, such as a person, another piece of writing, or an event. The writer may not provide much detail on the subject of an allusion because he or she expects you to be familiar with it. If you're unfamiliar with a reference, consider using an online search engine like Google to look it up so that you can better understand the work that you're reading. Satire may use irony, humor, exaggeration, or ridicule to criticize the foolishness or corruption of a person or group, with the goal of convincing the audience to recognize and possibly change a flaw in our society. For example, political cartoons often depict political figures with exaggerated features and ridiculous outfits doing outrageous things in order to emphasize how bad they or their policies are. Shows like The Daily Show and Saturday Night Live often use satire to ridicule current events through the use of humor. Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal exposes the Irish government's poor response to famine by suggesting that the Irish breed and eat babies to bring economic recovery. If this seems shocking and revolting to you, then you've grasped his purpose for writing. He's suggesting an ironic and absurd solution in order to mock the government's failures. Another example is Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, which uses the unnecessary murder of a villager to show that society should stop practicing traditions that are outdated and useless. Lastly, the most important literary element that you'll want to keep an eye out for is theme. A theme is a central concept or underlying message of a work of literature. Works usually have both major themes and minor themes. Themes are usually not explicitly stated. Instead, you have to find them by searching the text for literary elements that stand out or are used repeatedly, or by discovering morals, lessons, or arguments that are implied by the work. Themes can fit into broad categories such as love, growth, nature, death, and good versus evil, but good literature does more than just revolve around a theme. It says something particular about a theme. For example, Romeo and Juliet is more than just a story about love. It's a story about how two people can develop a love so fiery and passionate that it can result in pain and violence. Another way to find themes is to look for contradictions or tensions within the work. Perhaps the ending was shocking, and you believe that shock was used to convince the reader to make some kind of change in society. Or maybe you notice that the main character struggled to make a tough choice that resulted in him learning a life lesson that the reader could also learn. Finding the theme or themes in a work of literature is a great way to help you understand its overall purpose. Once you've read the work in its entirety, you can begin developing an informal response to it in the form of a response paper. A response paper should briefly summarize the text and your initial reactions to it, as well as point out any themes or other literary elements that stand out by converting your reading notes into an informal paper. The goal of your response paper should be to get you thinking about possible starting points for a more formal literary analysis essay on the text. Think of your reading notes and response paper as the invention or pre-writing step of the writing process for your literary analysis essay. Using your reading notes as a guide, focus on answering some or all of the following questions in paragraph format to develop your response paper. Were you able to determine any themes in the text? If so, what literary elements seem to contribute to the themes the most? What literary elements stand out to you and why? How did the text make you feel? Can you relate to the text's narrator, characters, situations, or events? Or does the text focus on a topic that you care about? If so, how and why? Did the text meet your initial expectations? Why or why not? Do you agree or disagree with something that happened in the text, or did it change your perspective on the topic in some way? Next, use your reading notes and response paper to get started on writing your literary analysis essay. Be sure to follow the 5 steps of the writing process as you go. After completing your response paper, the next step is to write a working thesis for your literary analysis. A working thesis is one that is used to help you get started on developing your argument that could potentially change as you write to better reflect your ideas. Your working thesis should be one sentence only that clearly states your overall claim and lists your supporting points. Your claim should focus on what the text means, what purpose it serves, or what message it's trying to get across to the reader. In other words, the claim should focus on one of the text's themes. Try to choose the theme that interests you the most, such as one that stood out to you when writing your response paper. It's much easier to write an essay when you're interested in the topic. Your supporting points should be the literary elements that you believe are used in the text to accomplish this purpose or theme. Listing your supporting points in your thesis helps give your reader an idea as to how your essay will be structured and helps your essay flow smoothly. The average literary analysis essay for a college course will use 3 supporting points. Let's look at this example of a working thesis. In Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare warns readers that passionate love can result in pain and violence by using symbolism, irony, and imagery. The first part of this thesis is the claim. The writer has chosen to focus on a lesson that the text teaches its readers. The play serves as a warning about passionate love. The second part of this thesis lists the supporting points. The writer believes that the lesson is demonstrated through the use of 3 literary elements: symbolism, irony, and imagery. Once you have a working thesis, you can move on to the next step of the writing process, structuring. In this step, you'll create an outline for your literary analysis using your thesis as a guide. The first paragraph should be your introduction. Start by introducing the work by stating the full title and the full name of the writer. Note that after the writer is introduced, you should use the writer's last name only for any subsequent references. Then, provide a brief summary of the work using 1 to 2 sentences. Keep your summary concise. Assume that your reader has read the text in full. Next, moving from general ideas to more specific ideas, state any basic information about the author, the work's context, or the topic that's needed to understand your argument. End your introduction with your working thesis statement. Next, you'll write the body of your analysis. Your body paragraphs should discuss each of your supporting points in the same order as they are listed in your thesis, using evidence from the work to support your claim. Use topic sentences at the beginning of each paragraph to introduce each point, and use transitions such as first, next, and finally to move from point to point. For instance, in the example thesis, the first supporting point is symbolism. Therefore, the entire first paragraph should focus on discussing symbolism, and symbolism should be clearly stated in the topic sentence. Here's an example of a topic sentence that introduces symbolism as the first supporting point. First, Romeo and Juliet warns readers that passionate love can result in pain and violence by using symbolism. This topic sentence should be followed by a detailed discussion of how the work uses symbolism to support the claim in your thesis. Introduce each example, cite specific evidence from the text, and explain each citation. Be sure to use enough examples to thoroughly support each point. Similarly, the next 2 body paragraphs should also begin with transitions and topic sentences to introduce the next 2 points, which should also be followed by specific evidence from the text. Finally, end your essay with a conclusion paragraph that reiterates your thesis and main points in light of the information provided in your body paragraphs. After writing your outline, you can begin the next step of the writing process, drafting. Let's go over a few tips to help you get through this step. First, keep in mind that the harder you work on your outline, the easier it will be to draft your essay. Additionally, be sure to schedule enough writing sessions to complete the essay on time. It's always a good idea to schedule more sessions than you think you'll need, just in case. Avoid procrastination, which can quickly create a snowball effect of stress, because the longer you put off drafting the essay, the more pressure you'll feel when writing. If you dread writing, consider writing in chunks. Set a timer and write until the timer goes off, then come back and look at your essay again with fresh eyes. Reward yourself with something that you enjoy after each completed writing session. If you struggle the most with writing introductions, start with your first body paragraph instead. There's no rule that states that you must begin writing your essay at the beginning. Ask for help if you need it. Your professor may be able to help you narrow down your topic, or you can schedule a tutoring session to help you organize your thoughts. Finally, as you write, remember that your first draft doesn't have to be your final draft. Sometimes it can be satisfying just to get something down on paper. The next step of the writing process is revising. Revising consists of adding, deleting, substituting, and rearranging material to better suit your purpose and audience. Consider asking a friend or family member to look over your writing and check to see if the message they receive is the same as the message that you intended to get across. If not, ask what parts were confusing. Check to make sure you've included enough information to support each point and haven't repeated any information. Restructure your essay if necessary. Following your outline can be a great tool for getting started, but you should make sure that the structure still makes sense once you've drafted the essay. Try reading your essay out loud to see if it flows naturally. Check for sentence variety. If every sentence is written in the same way, your reader may lose interest. Check for word repetition. Using the same words over and over again will make your reader think that you didn't put much effort into its development. Finally, make sure your wording is concise and cut out any extra words and phrases that are unnecessary. The final step of the writing process is editing. Editing focuses on reviewing and fixing grammatical, mechanical, and stylistic errors. Excessive errors can be distracting and make your essay difficult to read and understand. Schedule a tutoring session if necessary before submitting your analysis. Let's review. In this presentation, we discussed how to understand how literature can be used in life, prepare for reading a work of literature, read a work slowly and carefully, identify and analyze common literary elements, write a response paper, write a literary analysis, and follow the 5 steps of the writing process. Thanks for watching.